So my name is Taichi Kame. I will prefer the chat prefer the point of information on chat. So So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think that because Instagram or Facebook, that oftentimes the SNS and social technology company often include a lot of services, including the shopping or these kind of things. Often this creates a too large monopoly, and in which people cannot choose which service to opt in and which service to opt out. At this occasion, people will just lose the right to choose any kind of services in the first place. Moreover, the people will and moreover, this kind of monopoly will likely to rising up high prices or lower quality of services. That is quantitatively bad or qualitatively bad. For these reasons, we are very happy to regret this kind of integration of unrelated services. So the firstly, we will set up this page, but secondly, we will tell you under the status quo why this kind of monopoly are likely to be created in our startup house and how the counterfactual looks like better and what's the impact of this argument. We're gonna substantiate this argument. So before moving on, set up of this argument. So the firstly, we think that unrelated services, oftentimes including the setting out the free market services or just shopping services or music services or any kind of services that is not related to their prime industry. For example, in the case of Facebook, their prime industry or prime services is just the chat or this kind of connection with the kind of people in a social network. So yeah, so we are very happy to regret this kind of services that is not so clearly unrelated into the same platform. Any clarification or point of information, I will accept from the CEO.
Even if Facebook doesn't have selling online, why won't Shopee still monopolize the market?
Yeah, and that is a kind of mechanism that we're gonna told you in our startup house for the reason the media or advertising representative or something like this. So firstly, under the status quo, why the monopoly, especially not only in the kind of SNS industry, but also the whole industry, including the kind of shopping services are likely to be happen under the status quo, right? The firstly, why this kind of integration or unrelated services is happening under the status quo. The firstly, especially GAFA companies have a large capital in the first place. Therefore, they have a lot of capital to expand their businesses. The second reason why these kind of integration are likely to happen is because the risk management, right? They want to diversify their own services. At this occasion, even if for example, the Facebook chat services or the Google's, for example, mail services are beaten by other services, if they diversify its services, they can sustain for a long time. At this occasion, this kind of expansion to the unrelated services is happening under the status quo. Why these kind of things are likely to be accepted by the users, right? The firstly, trust from the users, right? The many people have already made an account of Instagram, Facebook. At this moment, it's very easy for them to opt in these kind of unrelated services made by the same platform. But secondly, those kind of people have an exclusive influence in advertisement or media industry, right? Oftentimes, they have a lot of exposure in the media. At this occasion, it's very easier for them to advertise these kind of products. But thirdly, they have a large capital. This means that they can sacrifice marginal profitability in a short term, and at this occasion they can they can involve more and more users by making use of subscription services that is in the first place that is provided for free. In this kind of way that they can create these kind of include a lot of services on our side of the house. So why this kind of situation is harmful? We think this kind of thing is especially harmful from the 3 layers of analysis. Firstly, that this will lead to it's more and more difficult for any kind of other competitors to enter this kind of market. For example, free market services. Why is it? So even if they have a kind of sophisticated services which is provided by Instagram, Facebook, because they cannot advertise themselves, given that especially for the youth, the most of the platform they have from which they get information is SNS. This means that Facebook or Instagram have exclusive influence on what kind of media exposure that youth get. At this occasion, as long as Facebook tries to eliminate these kind of newly oriented services, they can perpetuate monopoly, not only the SNS, but also these kind of other unrelated services, even if their services are relatively poor, because not so many youth do not have ability to these kind of things in the first place. But secondly, they cannot take a kind of special services that which GAFA company exclusively take. For example, subscription services, the first 6 months is just free. These kind of they cannot sacrifice marginal profitability in the short term. This means that it's very difficult for other kind of unrelated other competitors enter these kind of market. The second layers of analysis why this kind of monopoly is incredibly harmful is like twofold. The firstly, the users are likely to have less access to which services that they can opt in. This occasion, even if they can, they are very even if they have some kind of reason to oppose GAFA, they cannot do these kind of things. Given that these kind of unrelated services might be essential for some people, right? But secondly, that these kind of we think that kind of company are likely to have a less incentive improve their own services, right? For the reason that they have a lot of at this occasion that these kind of Facebook or Instagram succeed in diversify their own services. Therefore, even if their shopping services are just with kind of poor, are just not very difficult to use, as long as users just keep opt in these kind of services, and even if these kind of services just lose unpopularity, at this occasion they can rely upon the other services. At this occasion, because there's not so many competitors and they have so many alternative business that they can have, at this occasion services are likely to qualitatively worse on their side of the house. Why these kind of, so that is problematic, because every day that these kind of services use, if they have a more difficulty in getting another new products, they cannot have so much information. That in itself is very, very harmful. So before moving on, we'd like to accept from the CEO.
So please tell me why there's more competition towards Shopee while Shopee's monopolization just immediately lessens the choice for people. Now you have several platforms to choose from.
Yeah, so we're gonna tell you in the counterfactual why the situation is likely to look better. But before moving on, we're gonna tell you another how we're gonna under the status quo. We think these kind of GAFA exclusively get information from the users. However, under the status quo, that is limited to the SNS. However, it is expanded to the unrelated services, including essential services, just purchasing products. At this occasion, the people are more likely to opt out from these kind of companies. This means that even if GAFA or Huawei is investigated by so many kind of CIA or China, at this occasion, even some minority are very afraid of China. However, they cannot opt out from the Huawei services or Baidu services for the reason that this kind of the integration of unrelated services is happening. That is incredibly harmful. Why the situation is comparatively better? The firstly, new competitors are easy to enter this kind of market, right? Given that there's no so very GAFA or such a large capitalistic company are less likely to exist on our side of the house. At this occasion, more incentive to improve their own quality are more likely to happen comparatively, given that these kind of only technological companies have exclusive influence on the current economy. For all these reasons, we think our side comparatively to be better for both users and companies.
Thank you for that. Now I invite Leader of Opposition to open the case for OO. Here.
Few eyes in the chat, please. Let me pull up the chat box. In many instances, for small businesses to even get a platform in the first place, we think that they largely rely on things like Facebook Marketplace and Instagram Shop. And in this debate, we're going to prove to you why that's so particularly important. A few things that we're also going to prove. Number one, how it better enables small businesses as an equalizer. And second of all, we're going to prove to you why consumers benefit more and how is that significant. A few rebuttals now. The first is that even if we do have to defend monopolization, why that's okay. The first is because of economies of scale, that there are cheaper goods, and since corporations have more funding to make the quality of goods better, you get cheaper goods and services, and at the end of the day, the purchasing power of an average person gets to increase. You get a higher quality of life. Second of all, is that it's going to be better for consumers and businesses, right? The moment in which you have increased exposure to more choices as options are more available and visible, is going to benefit small businesses and consumers, as small businesses now have even more platforms to advertise on. The second thing now is that Opening government says that there is no incentive for them to improve, right? Notice how big tech also has an incentive to provide good quality services and products because number one, it brings them money. Second of all, is that media attention on good products and services such as AirPods, for example, gets sensationalized. Third of all, is that being first in a market is strategically good. And fifth of all, is that there is a good look on them for their best product. They get general good optics at the end of the day. That there is still competition because many big technology companies are still competing, such as Google versus Facebook or Amazon versus Taobao. Onto my substantives. The first is how we get more consumer benefits. We're going to prove to you why it better fulfills consumer needs on our side of the debate. The first is that we're going to talk to you about the basis of consumerism. At the end of the day, the moment in which you as a consumer buy into any products or services is just for the sake of convenience. That's the ultimate aim for that's the ultimate incentive for a consumer. We think that on our side of the debate, your needs as a consumer are met and centralized on a few apps, which basically meets what you want. And our claim here is that utility for consumers is something that is preferred over the abstract benefits of privacy if OG wants to talk about it. There are multiple instances in which people already give up their privacy to access greater practical utility. For example, you get cookies on internet that we consent to, CCTVs to ensure security in public places. We think that's pretty analogous in this instance. So, and moving on to my next point on ways in which they can still be held accountable, those corporations can still be held accountable with data. Number one is that there is an increased pressure on Facebook after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. There is a great political will to do it. Mark Zuckerberg got brought into the congressional hearing. Second of all, is about rising privacy issues as a voter concern. The youth voter base are becoming an increasingly important voter base, right? That there is an access that they're more concerned about access to information and things about companies exploiting privacy laws. Third of all is about how because of it rising as a voter concern that it becomes laws that policymakers are concerned with. So this looks like new and stricter EU data laws being tightened and all of these instances. Second argument now is that we think that having that on our side of the debate, it better enables small businesses. And we're going to prove to you that it gives a greater boon in terms of them being able to connect to a customer base. The first is on the aspect of marketing. Notice how Facebook Marketplace and Instagram Shop offer small businesses advertising opportunities and visibility that they would otherwise not be able to reach out to. The comparative is that small businesses have to purely rely on physical retail shops, which isn't proving as well during COVID-19. And second of all, going towards smaller platforms that doesn't afford them such a great customer base or such great visibility or advertising opportunities. Second of all, is that presently there is already a huge user base on popular platforms like Facebook and Instagram that can be utilized by those small businesses. Notice how Facebook, Instagram, and Airbnb rely on having small businesses buy into those platforms and use them as a marketplace in the first place, right? So it is going to be favorable to those small businesses who have to rely on them. That means that will look like instances them giving those small businesses increased exposure towards those users who are currently using those social media or Airbnb platforms. So what is the comparative now? We think that people on our side of the that in the status quo, people already tend to buy from large companies, for example, IKEA or Swarovski, and all of these large companies instead of small businesses. Right now, we think that instead on our side of the debate, it equalizes the playing field for small businesses if they can get a platform on social media that can counter all of the large media campaigns that IKEA and Swarovski can afford to hold. And third of all, why does corporations have an incentive to not set monopolies? The first is there's increased scrutiny and liberal trends. Second of all, it's just basically if you go into social media, you constantly see things like how Amazon is under fire for underpaying their employees. We think that at enough, those mega corporations, those big corporations have an incentive to not exploit those small businesses. But before I move on, yes, CG.
Wait. So just to clarify, you are saying that Facebook, who wants to outcompete every single individual, like I don't know, furniture store, will allow the furniture stores they're competing against to be put onto their platform.
Facebook wants to outcompete furniture stores. We think that in the very first place, Facebook is centralized on technology and a social media app. We think that at the end of the day, they are going to be more focused on the set market that they currently dominate rather than try to expand towards buying furniture stores or something. But right now, let's be practical. We think that right now, at the very least, if you go onto Facebook Marketplace, you get to see small businesses like furniture stores that you mentioned and are getting benefits out there. And we don't see how those small businesses, just purely by advertising or using Facebook Marketplace, is going to get exploited by Facebook. So onto my final point about how it brings an increased convenience to consumers as well as business owners, which is what we proved to you. Number one, we've already proved to you that you get a larger user base. People all use things like Instagram and Facebook and are familiarized with it. Secondly, even if even smaller unicorn companies rely on services and platforms from Google, Facebook. So without Google or Facebook, they can have good marketing, for example, ads, getting connected to influencers, sponsored posts. They cannot engage with consumers. There's overall less ideas to kickstart their business. Third of all, is that those economics of scales means that those products are cheaper. Fourth of all, that those smaller firms get to benefit and still rely on all of these apps in the first place, which is synonymous on and what happens in this debate. And overall, we have proved to you that it is better for consumers and businesses that this increased exposure to more choice as options are more available and visible. On our side of the debate, incredibly proud to oppose.
Awesome, thank you for that. Now I invite DPMK here.
I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let me first begin with some reconstruction. They told us that monopoly is going to be to better services and lead to cheaper products because of monopolization, because they have more investment to make. I don't think this made any sense when we explained to you from PM on literally many, many reasons as to why these companies don't have incentive to better themselves in any way. First, because they have monopoly, they can just bring down the quality of their products. Doesn't mean that like they're going to lose followers or anything. But second, we believe like because they have lots of services among different areas, they're able to just like cut off one service if it fails. This means that like many of these services are not going to be like funded enough for like to the extent like that the OO wants to say. And they told us is because these companies have competition with other companies, like other hegemonic companies, they still have incentive to better. This like really like when you actually listen to their example that they gave you, it doesn't really make sense. Like Amazon and Google are not competing against each other. They're not actually like I don't think like people are actually choosing between using Amazon and Google because first of all they're using different services. But the other example that they gave you was about like Taiwan and like Amazon, which is like completely used in like different countries, right? One is in China, one is like many Western centric companies. So I don't think it's really necessarily true that like these kind of companies are in competition in the first place. For example, like 90% of people are using Instagram, and I think this is something that is undeniably true. And then they told us that because these companies have incentive to look good for the public, they're not going to like they're going to like make better services and stuff like that. First of all, like because we already told you from Prime Minister about how they have the ability to control the opinions of these people through like media control or through the kind of information that they feed to you. And for that reason, we don't think this stood either. Then next, let's move on to their case. They told us that because these companies have an incentive to give small shops a place to like thrive, they'll be able to do so. First of all, I think this was a really, really narrow characterization of the debate. And I think this was really unfair to the motion. First of all, they told us because like Facebook shops are basically allowing small shops to like put their ads on there, it's going to be good. First of all, I don't think this was the main context of this debate. When we talk about, for example, like Amazon Home Services, these are not like small shops, small businesses coming in, but rather Amazon creating a subsection of their company that is applied to like this new kind of business in the first place. So I don't think this was really that important. But then they told us that like they're going to like give these companies like really, really small companies a chance to like thrive in this company. First of all, I don't understand that they have any incentive to do so, beginning the fact that they're not going to be able to pay them that much money or not going to make them that much money in the first place, right? We believe that like this isn't necessarily true, but also we look at the kind of system that Facebook and other apps have in place, or like Google has in place for like advertisement and stuff, you can tell that this is true. For example, like Google has a system of like bid system of like advertisement in which when at the point in which like you put in more money, that allows you to put in your advertisement first over like other advertisements, right? This is like an actual system that's implemented in Google searches, for example. These kind of things tell you that the only people that'll be able to afford the kind of advertisement that they talk about, or for the kind of like a push that they said that will make their company thrive, is something that is only possible for like richer companies in general. And don't think this is necessarily true for like individual small businesses or individual small companies that they were talking about on their side. but we still tell you that even if you say that like these companies will be able to like put their markets out there, so it's really good. We don't think this is true either, at the point in which we believe they'll be controlled by the kind of narratives that controlled by whatever Facebook wants them to do, right? At the point in which they're able to say, we will pull your company off of this if you don't comply to what we say, they'll just be able to say like bring your prices down, or for example, or like make sure you or like force them to like not use make the products that they really want to. I don't think this is necessarily good in any way. So next, what do we tell you? We told you that first of all, because these companies have monopolies, we are not able to people are not able to opt out of this in the first place. We think this is like a really, really important harm that was completely like missed from OO. We told you that this is harmful because first of all, this means that people are unable to opt out of the kind of information that they're giving into these places. They told us about how people comply to cookies and stuff like that. This is because they don't have an option to, right? Because they have no alternative to do so. They have to give away their credit card information to Amazon because they think that they have no other choice to. Notice that this is far better on the counterfactual when in the point in which they choose to use a different service for a different meaning. This means that like this is comparatively way better than whatever they want to say. Notice that like Facebook is something that is basically impossible to opt out of, considering the fact that things like communities and friends and like things are already built there. And like for example, I wouldn't be at this tournament if Facebook didn't exist. And these kind of things strictly tell you that it's impossible for people to opt out of Facebook, meaning that they can't choose any other way. Sure, I'll take your POI from the person with the camera.
Okay, if these companies do not have the incentive to improve and other companies better address the consumer needs, please tell me how the hell they're going to monopolize the market.
Oh my god, we told you so many reasons how that's going to happen. I think I don't need to repeat myself from PM, but we already told you that like they have, because people are, first of all, already on things like Facebook, they're already going to see ads for these places in the first place. People already have accounts on these sites, which means it's far easier for them to not like go to a different site, but just use whatever is on there. For example, we told you many layers of analysis, and I don't think I need to repeat myself again. And then notice that why is like monopoly so harmful in the first place? We told you about like the idea that people can opt out. We also believe that this is harmful because like they can't be called out on the wrongdoings that they do. They can't be held accountable for anything that they do. For example, like low wages, maybe they have like really bad shops that are run by child labor in developing countries. These things can't be called out by like the public, or the public can't really opt out of using this service in the first place. This means that first they have to like opt into like using these harmful services, but also this means that like these companies can't be held accountable, and it's not going to like they have no incentive to change at the point in which the customers are always going to be there no matter what kind of action they take. Notice that they told us that because there are things like regulations and the voter base really cares about these things, it's not a problem. First of all, like these companies are not going to be that transparent and they're going to tell you like we're doing child labor in these within these developing countries, so like just deal with that. Obviously these companies have incentive to hide this, and they also have the ability to hide this at the point in which they can like block out all the information, whatever information people receive. But also like regulations don't necessarily work at the point in which like there's like political lobbying against like politicians to prevent them from getting things like regulations that would prevent them from doing whatever these kind of harmful things are. We believe this is necessarily the most important impact in this debate, considering the fact that like these companies not being held accountable and these companies being owned by these rich capitalist people that could exploit people is like seriously really bad. Notice that also we believe these companies are able to stop other startup companies from coming onto this site because first of all, they have like lots of information about these. For example, if like one person sends a text or a mail to another person talking about this new startup company that they want to do, Facebook is going to know about this and it's going to be able to like either buy off the company or like prevent them from like starting the company in the first place. All these things tell you that these companies' monopoly is like something that is really, really big and something that would be really, really harmful to both the consumer and to the general public, considering the fact of regulations and stuff like that. For all these reasons, we're incredibly proud to propose.
Awesome, thank you for that. Now invite DLO to close the opening half year here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you are.
I'll take a POI through chat. If reader has one, yeah. Okay. 3, 2, One, people like to say Among Us is dead, but actually OG is, because they just dump a bunch of harms without actually telling you why things get better in the comparative, right? I'm going to talk about three things in this speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about consumer choice and welfare. Two, I'm going to talk about monopolization. And third, I'm going to take the absolute worst case of our side and still say why we win. The first thing I want to talk about is why consumer welfare and choice is significantly better under our side. I think the problem with the OG is it just assume there's zero opt-out mechanisms. I think we have a few responses to this. One, I think we attain large amounts of profits due to the relatively lower cost of entry as a business to begin on the platform. What this means is that seemingly as you are able to spend less on towards other things we're going to explain later as well, as to why necessarily it's easier for a business to start up on Facebook Marketplace or Instagram Shop as opposed to other platforms that exist. This necessarily means you're able to keep more of those profits and you are insulated from the harmful cost of opt-out due to the safety nets that we provide on our side when people are able to retain more profits. But two, presumably these industries aren't monopolized by one single company. Yes, it's a few big guys up there. So you have Amazon, but it still competes against Google. Thirdly, like why exactly is the comparative here? Because they assume that people are going to buy into small businesses on their side. I'm just not sure why that's true, because they assume that small businesses are going to prosper. What we said was people will probably still go towards big businesses because that was the easiest option for them. Insofar as these big businesses were probably likely to have things like greater economies of scale or more brand recognition, or literally all the mechanisms that OG wants to talk about under their side, probably means that people are still going to shift towards big businesses anyway. So I'm unsure as to why their side completely get rid of the harms of monopolization. But what we said was it was far easier for small businesses to actually gain an equalizer in terms of competing with these bigger companies for the reason that the cost of opting in towards these platforms was just far lower. I want you to think about this for a second, right? Is it easier for a business to necessarily start up on something like Facebook Marketplace where it's just free to do so, or go towards other platforms like Shopify to pay high amounts per month just to start a website? All of this necessarily means that it's incredibly hard for people to necessarily get onto the platform in the first place, and therefore it's hard for small businesses which they wanted to protect under their side. But the second thing to say here as to why small businesses are unlikely to prosper is that probably that the things that we get from this shared marketplace here, right, where we have things like integration of unrelated services where the prime industry is breaking out into other things as well, what we would say is you're able to benefit from the other subsets of those company. So for example, if Instagram is able to have things like ads or influencers or sponsored posts, these are all things that are unique towards Instagram Marketplace, because these are things that exist on other parts of the Instagram platform. So influencers exist on Instagram, and therefore they're able to connect these things more seamlessly, and therefore it becomes an easier experience for consumers and for businesses to start up as well. So presumably what this means is that businesses don't have to have less cost because they're able to invest into one platform that provides all of these things, rather than having to branch out into different things and spread their costs elsewhere, which means that the small businesses they want to protect actually get worse under their side. But the third thing I want to say here is that what this means is that effective algorithms like Instagram implements means that necessarily you're able to select the preferences of people based on the data that you get. So for example, if there's ads or things like that, we are willing to defend ads happen to some extent, and so therefore it means that people are just able to get have their ads, and then Instagram is able to use their algorithms to analyze what the users' preferences want and necessarily allocate them to pages that show them good products that they want. So for example, if you're environmentally friendly, it'll give you like metal straws. These are things that uniquely exist on Instagram, and what the true benefit that we provided to you was that people don't have to switch towards other platforms as well, because everything is integrated on the web platform. What we said was incredibly important here is that if someone is going to want to purchase a product, most people don't have lots of time to go out to Instagram and find go to other websites and find local businesses. The easier thing to do was just to find local businesses that existed within Instagram. When you were already scrolling through the app, it appears on your home page. The comparative is that when we don't actually have these things there, people are just going to go towards the big businesses anyway. So it's unclear why things get better under their side. So consumer choice and the ways for businesses start up is far better under our side of the house. The second thing I want to talk about here is monopolization, because I want to talk about incentives to improve, because OG just completely ignores this. Firstly, because it brings some money, it's pretty intuitive, right? Secondly, because the media attention on good products, if you create a really good product that's revolutionary and innovative, these things get sensationalized in the media. Thirdly, because being the first in the market is strategically good. For example, when you have a really HD retina screen, people necessarily want to talk about you, and necessarily mean you outcompete your competitors. But fourthly, there's still competition because many big tech companies are still competing, like Google versus Facebook. Sure, CG.
Being the first to create something is a good thing if there's a market. There's no incentive to innovate if there was no competition to begin with, in which case there's no analysis as to why, other than there are still competition, to why specifically is still monopolistic.
No. So you don't get to prove that competition happens under your side, because what you are saying is that people are able to compete fairly. What we are saying is there's no way for them to compete fairly, because you are assuming that people are able to access these forms of things anyway, because I don't think it's actually what's happening here. Because presumably what this motion talks about is unrelated services into the same platform. So it necessarily isn't just products that are coming out of this. So the idea about chairs that you talk about, it's unclear why Facebook suddenly going to make IKEA chairs. What's more likely to happen is when you have Facebook and Facebook Marketplace happening on that same platform, that means that IKEA sells on Facebook Marketplace rather than having its own IKEA website, or IKEA going on to Shopify and making its own website. That's the true distinction here. What we prove it's harder for small businesses to succeed under their side of the house. But the second thing I want to point out here is accountability. I think you'll probably still be neutral, unlike what OG suggests. One, because Facebook is in a parallel situation in the US as in bad public trust, so have incentives to do well. Two, if Facebook is not seen as impartial, then when the other political party gets into power, they'll roll back protections for Facebook. So Facebook has incentives to make sure that they're neutral and not particularly aligned with one side. But I also want to talk about why small businesses and ability to grow is bad, because I think OG's fatal flaw was failing to tell you why things get better. Because I don't think it's fair for them to burden push on us and to say that small businesses are completely going to be alleviated under our side of the house. What we said was specifically that they have a better playing field to play on, because necessarily when everyone is on Instagram Marketplace, that was something that was good, because necessarily means that users could access small businesses. You could access someone who's from like right there, or you necessarily could when it comes towards Airbnb classes, you're able to access those Airbnb classes when you're on the Airbnb app anyway, rather than a comparative which you automatically go towards the larger companies because you don't know where to start, so your biases lead you to the larger companies. What we do is where we give preferences towards what users have right where they need it, and that is on the platforms that they already use. So therefore, it's far easier for small businesses to reach these areas, especially when you have things like Facebook ads, when you have Google ads. But I think I'm going to do the comparative here. I'm going to take the best case of the opening government team, because literally all the incentives that OG identifies for monopolization probably still exist regardless. One, it's unclear why it's an exclusive harm on our side, because I only know that the arguments are bashing monopolies. They're not bashing the integration of unrelated services. Two, what we say is the existence of a monopoly might happen anyway. So if it's not Airbnb, class, it's Udemy. But uniquely, big tech corporations with the influence and capital are the only actors that can challenge the hegemony of the corporations that are going to dominate the market otherwise. So they incur the same harms because Shopee retains the large amount of market share as opposed to just Facebook Marketplace doing it. So what does this mean? So this means that even if you don't have this integration of services, it's far harder for you to hold these companies to account, because it's probably true that Shopee is going to then go pick up that marketplace, and then it's far harder to hold them to account because necessarily you don't have as much scrutiny of those things. Specifically, where Facebook is a large actor, it means that they're able to have many industries within that. It means you're able to scrutinize Facebook from all points of angles and able to hold them to account. But people don't feel the same way for things like Shopee. But the second thing to say here is that even if you don't buy the idea about scrutinization, it's probably true that it becomes entirely a wash. So what happens here is that monopolization is a wash because it like to happen on either side. But the unique benefit we brought you about why it's better for consumers to benefit, why it's necessarily better for businesses to start up on the platform as opposed to go to things like Shopify where you have to pay far more, or necessarily start on their own or brick and mortar shops. All this means that OG is completely out of this debate. O is happy to proceed.
Hi, am I audible?
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think CG agrees with O that OG didn't really prove like why companies are monopolistic and why their monopoly is harmful. So we are just going to prove that for you. I think companies are monopolistic in a few ways. The first way they're monopolistic is that they use their capital to aggressively purchase other companies. So what this looks like is, for example, Shopee has the ability to acquire Lazada, QOO, and Redmart under their brand and stuff like that. So this includes like semi-large businesses and smaller businesses as well. I think the second thing that monopoly does is that it forces smaller companies and users into coercive deals because the monopoly is very large to begin with. So it's not just acquisition of like larger companies, it is larger companies merging with each other to form like a very monopolistic market, right? Or you create specifically a company in the market that outcompetes all other small users, right? Which is a counter to the, but small businesses can survive under a monopoly, right? Which is something that O brought out. For example, Airbnb was created to clearly outcompete like the basic rental systems that exist in a lot of countries and SMEs as well. So that's the second option. The third option, right, is that if A and B fail, these like larger companies would participate in bad faith lawsuits to bankrupt these smaller companies, either through lowering the cost beyond the means of production of like smaller like companies, or like any amount of lawsuits to get these small companies out of the window to begin with. So I think this is why, right, there is no opt-out mechanism for these smaller companies, because either they buy into this particular deal, which is not as rosy, like I have to give away like 20 to 30% of my commission to list my property on Airbnb, or I have to submit and say, I'm not going to open my small market like business anymore because I don't have like the advertising power to begin with, and I'll be suppressed even if I create a better or like larger business. So I think the harm on the scale for our side, right, is larger if we like spot this thing, right? It's worse than when we allow like the assimilation of larger companies, which implicitly is what like opening and closing on their side support. If large companies like Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp exist, and imagine if this happens in like the property market, for example, this becomes like a very, very like monopolistic ground where literally all your small businesses will have to listen to the whims of the larger like corporations, because these larger corporations are the corporations that control the means of production, advertising, and literally every single choice that you can make legally and economically speaking. So some like rebuttals towards like before I go on to like my positive material. So generally like says that they help small businesses and they provide them a platform with lower like prices of scale. So I think this is not true, because on the basis of economies of scale, companies become too large for effective and efficient management, and this like hurts like businesses irregardless of their intention. This means two things. Number one, a lot of middlemen like sucking the prices and costs in the supply chain, which makes your average product much more expensive as compared to if you purchase it from a small like tuck shop like market. The second thing is upper management is typically not in touch with ground problems and niche issues. A very, very good example is how Jeff Bezos loved the fact that Amazon like workers were pissing in the bottles and say, thank you for funding my space race, So we see that there's a very, very large disconnect in terms of like how they want to relate to their smaller market customers and stuff like that. I think there are three impacts like uniquely coming from CG from this. The first is that production cost increases in larger larger monopolies because of too many minimum and different systems of taxation designed to limit like this particular like monopoly, right? So for example, like how Grab and Uber are able to like hike their prices when it comes to like COVID, but not redistribute it fairly to their drivers and stuff like that. I think the second thing, right, is that the only way that these particular like corporations are able to decrease the quality of their products, right, is when the quality of the products decreases significantly, then like the price decreases. So the customer is affected while you outcompete the small businesses as well, and the overall quality of the product decreases as a whole. I think the last thing, right, is that customer services become a lot worse when you're dealing with large monopolistic corporations as compared to like smaller corporations, and this affects the incentive for people to create businesses as a whole, which I'm going to be talking about why it's harmful. I think three reasons why customer services become a lot worse. The first is that these larger corporations or like multi-conglomerates aren't as obligated to respond to smaller users or hosts as compared to like smaller companies. For example, how the Airbnb refund system takes to half a year to refund like a significant portion if a customer makes an errant claim against you and stuff like that. This is a harm that doesn't exist if there are more like smaller businesses under our side. I think the second thing, right, is that you usually what these larger companies do is that they usually make the middleman resolve it between themselves, right, which means that the lowest common denominator is hurt the most. And then the last, right, is that you're unable to provide niche services like your mom and pop shops, right, which makes consumers have less like flexibility of choice, and basically they're being outcompeted and the products don't have the same quality as well. I think this under our side exclusively also harms inflation for three reasons, like innovation for three reasons. The first is that corporate structures are very, very inefficient in gaining like innovation in the first place, because the communication systems between the ground up like process of innovation is very, very inefficient. I think the second idea, right, is that there's a lack of incentive to innovate within these particular corporations, right, due to the lack of cooperation, which is something that cannot be understated. For example, how all of the phones in like our different like companies are coming up to be the same model and shape. There's no real innovation as to what the kinds of OSs are other than security and stuff like that. So the same logic can be applied to services, right? Why should I make my services more efficient when I directly profit from the inefficiency of my services? These kinds of things, as compared to like smaller companies not being able to profit from these kinds of things. I think the last thing, right, is that these companies have the ability to snub ideas that removes the middleman or improves this particular platform, right? Or the inefficiency, because the inefficiency is very, very profitable. For example, things like assimilation and stuff like that. For example, like snuffing out ideas of innovation, which can improve the particular system as a whole. So this directly harms small businesses, and this is a bad thing, right? Because you're directly causing economic harm to countries that particularly rely on small businesses that tend to be like a majority of like companies as a whole. But before 6, I'll take a PY.
So
So
this
why?
This debate is not about Facebook making cakes. It's about whether a bakery should sell on Shopify or Facebook Marketplace. What we said was the bakery can benefit from the exposure to 1 billion users of Facebook.
Okay, what I'm saying, right, is that if they find us, if these rich people find a suitable market for them to monopolize, and then they'll just create another company under their name and monopolize the market altogether, which is the thing that we are trying to avoid, right? Which is to say that they can't promote like alternative businesses under their side. So I think the reason why things get better on our side, right, is a few like reasons. The first is that you get more choice because smaller businesses get better visibility under our site when there's no like corporations hounding them for extreme advertisement prices, right? So advertising is not just related to like not just limited to social media, but there's also other forms of advertisements like on the street advertisements and stuff like that. You basically get more choice because these small businesses are not outcompeted in the first place, and you can support your community more instead of resorting to these online businesses. I think the second benefit, right, is that customers like get better like relationships like with these small businesses as compared to connecting towards like large corporations which don't really care about your interests and stuff like that. And the reason is because like smaller businesses do have a smaller pool of customers and they rely on like smaller like income to survive. And for all these reasons, right, because we understand like what's the exclusive harm that comes with a monopoly and why we stand against that and we support small businesses developing organic markets for themselves, we take this debate.
Awesome, thank you for that. Now invite member of opposition. You're here.
Hello.
Member of op.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Wait, sorry, give me a sec. My computer's lagging a little. Oh, no.
Your voice is muffled and there's a lot of background noise.
Yeah, sorry, that's my computer. That's like my computer's problem. Like overheats very easily, so sorry for that. Hey, please don't. Just. Sorry, wait, give me a sec. Sorry, my computer's lagging really badly right now. Okay, I don't know if you guys can hear me now. Is it clearer
You're
now?
audible though. You're audible. You're really clear.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Starting my speech is sorry. Starting my speech in sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Just a few responses for closing government. Number one, they say that the problem with integrating such markets is because of the very monopolistic nature of market, in where how people can coerce smaller companies into getting certain deals, or even they can somehow aggressively purchase the sort of companies. We have two layers of responses to this. Number one, we say that that's not true because the motion has stated that like it's just unrelated services, so we don't think that that's just exclusive to just integrating companies. Can also be Facebook developing their own services in the first place. And even if that is true, we see that there are already, as OO has already replied to you, there are already accountability state measures in status quo, in where people will call out you if you kind of coerce, or you have this kind of very monopolistic kind of measures put in place, or very exploitative measures, such as Jeff Bezos exploiting their workers and getting caught out in parliament. We add a layer of analysis to this by saying that government has the incentive to also regulate its own companies, because the government has this sort of incentive to keep this sort of credibility that they own, so that they have better trust in the people, and it will be better to further implement their policies. So they're more likely going to have this kind of active stance to condemn such issues, like what they're currently doing to Google or even Facebook, like calling them out. And other than that, we see that even if there are such sort of measures put in place to actually get rid of smaller companies, we see that in most cases the reason why certain companies actually succeed is because of the fact that they were able to meet the supplies and demand of the market, or they were even able to develop certain ideas that weren't pre-existing in the markets, or even better ideas in the market, such as how Grab in Malaysia were able to come up with a system that kind of caters to the Malaysian market. Now, other than that, secondly, they said that that it's not good to integrate because the management is too large and then just inherently makes the products more expensive. We think that's not true because, number one, in most cases, these companies are very successful for a reason. They're successful because they were able to develop some sort of company model that was able to be such a efficiently deliver their products and deliver what they wanted to. So moreover, a lot of companies also use big companies like Amazon as a reference to how they should create a company model. And lastly, they say that they lack the incentive to further innovate. We say that that's not true because on our side, what we really get by integrating, let's just take government's model somehow smaller companies integrating with larger companies. We say that in most cases, what larger companies can provide to you is very unique resources that aren't available in government sites, such as resources, such as developers. I'll take one at 5, such as resources, such as developers in the long run. And now moving on to my extensions in this argument. So how do we differ ourselves from OO? Is that OO only brought to us a few OO only brought to us a few on like how the principle of somehow the utility of consumers and convenience is important. We further extend this principle by saying that we have two other extensions of this principle. Number one, the principle of free market. We say the fundamental principle of free market that we should be whole in this world is that of the expansion of market itself. We think the reason why we have free market in the first place is because it was to prevent dictatorship control. It was to prevent government's further interference on market in the first place. So we see that what this really does is that by actually opposing it or even regretting it in the first place, what this does is that it leads to a further limiting of the market. Because now you're going to say that the reason why we're actually banning this is because the fundamental reason that we think that companies can monopolize it. Now what this does is that it creates a reason for further governmental officials to use that reason to further intervene in this free market, and which destroys the purpose of the market as a whole. And secondly, we see that what this does, the principle of free market, is to create competition. If this kind of new technology or new idea that was actually never proposed in the market before was actually proposed, what this does is that it creates inspires more developers, app developers or whatever, to further inspired by that idea to further develop better apps that could cater better towards the market. And the second principle we brought up that's unique to our side that OO hasn't brought up is on the principle of choice and why this is very important. I'll take 1 and 5, sorry. And why this is important. We see that in status quo, in a very hedonistic society, we say we should prioritize fulfilling the needs of people as a whole, giving them more choice to make their lives better, because we understand that in status quo that a lot of people have different interpretation of life. So the more different technologies we were able to develop, we just give them a better life, and it could actually benefit the people of society as a whole on our side. Now moving on to my practical arguments on how, number one, how this integration itself is inherently important. We see that yes, monopolistic do occur, but we already tackled that from responses. We see the most important factor of integration itself is that it helps smaller companies and startup companies. How does this work? We see that a lot of cases, startup companies or even developers or even university graduates, they have excellent ideas, exceptional ideas that weren't present in the market before. But the reason why they cannot further propagate this idea or cannot further develop this idea is because there weren't any existing resources put in place, or they weren't able to receive any fundings in place. And what these ideas really does is that these ideas could really be breakthroughs in market. It could mean that with this idea, humanity can just leap forward if only this young university graduate was able to get the resources they need. And thus we think that the only way to actually help these young graduates is through by integrating such companies, integrating markets, by getting large conglomerates to come out and to actually work on other sectors and not just focus on the one technological sectors and forget about the other sectors. Why we see that this is inherently a win-win situation. Oh, I'm sorry for those I didn't receive POI because I don't have time. We see that this resource, what this does is that, you know, it's uniquely exclusive to our side, in where you get this kind of statistics, fundings, employees that could further help, you know, this young developer innovate their ideas, help them further propagate their ideas, and eventually cause change to society as a whole. And lastly, what this does is that we say that it develops, you know, society, that it actually helps push develop society as a whole. Because the reason why we're here today and the reason why we have Facebook or even such technologies in the first place was because of how this sort of pre-existing, you know, integration or this kind of lack of limit of the market that pushes to where we are today. If we're unable to develop, if we are not willing to, you know, allow smaller companies to come in, give them option to come in, we see that they cannot develop, and that, you know, it limits them, and that, you know, our society as a whole cannot develop as well. And what this does is that it also actively limits one's country capability of competing with another country. So such as the tech war in the US and China, this actually helps them as well, because now the US might have a better tech with China, because now the other companies are now giving an option. There's now an open options for other companies to integrate with them. And now yeah, so what have I brought to you in this debate? Number one, I brought you the unique extensions on principles, and secondly, on how this integrations actually benefits to young developers out there, even young companies out there who needs it to further propagate the idea and to actually, you know, better society and to create more competition in the market and more ideas coming out. Now before the proposed. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now I invite Govik here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Cool. Take my POIs in chat. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. I think CO is wait, sorry, my god, my scroll didn't work. Sorry. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. I think CO is out of this debate to the point in which neither of their extensions have premises, right? So they have two main extensions. The first is that like government will want to intervene more and that inhibits things. Zero premise for this. The second is technology with China will be a lot better and it's easy to counter China. Zero premise to this. Therefore, not really viable, right? So I'm going to be doing things a bit more like differently. So CO is out of this debate, right? The first is I'm going to be telling you what the extension was and why CO has never rebutted it and why the no team is going to rebut it. The second is that on how you I'll engage with OO and specifically tell you why they just did not do the debate, right? So what was our extension, right? Is that the premise of the entire debate, right, is that these things are not only extremely monopolistic, but they can be extremely monopolistic and they have all incentive to do so. So my partner gave you 3 reasons it was never responded to. The first is that the reason why they do this is because they're trying to capture market share. Their end goal is trying to expand within these niches and to increase the market capture, right? It just gets them more money and aligns the pockets of upper management. The second is I think it's important to note that like the only people who can do this are big, powerful companies, right? People with billions of dollars to just start up things and to just make things, right? Two things. One, they have a major, like huge advantage in terms of economic status, right? So like Facebook has a few $1 billion to throw into Facebook gaming, but Twitch has to start up from scratch, right? So this debate is not about like Lazada versus QOO. It's Facebook with billions of dollars versus QOO, because QOO cannot expand to anything else out, right? So like, yeah, that's not the debate here. Yeah, the debate is whether you are competing within niche markets and whether like big gigantic companies like with billions of dollars should be able to enter these niche markets, right? I think that number two is also means that it's easier to poach people and talent from other smaller companies, which makes it a lot harder for newer companies to emerge, right? This takes down the argument on like CO where they're like, oh no, but what about things like, for example, the new graduate, right? I think that the fact they can offer like higher wages, offer more opportunities also means that a lot of these like smaller companies that don't get the ability to start up, right? So this is precisely to which all the harms that like my member accrued. There was also, by the way, never engaged. One, harms quality of service. Also, it takes like 1 billion years for me to finally process the fact that my food panda that my Grab my Grab food didn't come. Second is that the prices will increase later on. So monopolistic companies, even if cheaper in the short term, right, has all incentive to increase price, to increase the market share, right? So once they're out competed, right, they increase prices later on. So it's simple behavioral economics, right? People compete, I reduce price, people come to me, right? So I'm Facebook, so I reduce price and I capture a large portion of market share, right? Companies have less market share, so they get out of the industry because they can't sustain their short-term costs anymore. Therefore, no more competition. The logical like extension here, just increase price because I have no other competition to care about anyways. And any additional like dollars and cents going into R&D is wasted money because I'm then wasting profits, right? So simple Keynesian economics also tells you that this also trickles down into things like, for example, no innovation because there's no competition whatsoever. So the main reason why your R&D is because I do it for in the short-term cost for long-term benefits and long-term market share, right? There's no incentive to R&D if I already have the entire market to begin with. Therefore, there is no ability for you to actually like reduce price, or B, innovate, right? The counterfactual is this, right? They keep accusing us of not having no counterfactual, but they don't engage with it when my member comes out and tell you, right? Is that there's more free market because big companies, we oppose big companies that to infiltrate within these spaces. There's no one real competitor within these spaces anyway. So setting up a company and maintaining said company is about the same amount of cost across the board. So you don't have some rando billion-dollar Facebook coming into like the marketplace market, right? Two, I think it also necessarily means that like that there's a more diverse number of like companies that can exist within these status quo and can continue their short-term costs and continue on innovation. So then that's when all the benefits of like having more competition comes in. Before I move on, I'll take one from OO because that they couldn't, yeah.
Yeah, so like someone else is going to still fill up the vacuum of who is the dominant player in the marketplace market. What we say is, even if that's filled up by Facebook, at least you can use Facebook ads to get other people on Facebook to buy from your business.
Skill. So like, okay, so let's go on to this, the first response, right? Which is when industry also got monopoly, there's harms. Let's disprove the premise. Because like specialized industries in the vacuum has many other companies. So like it's damn stupid for Op to be like, oh no, what about Shopee? Because Shopee, Lazada, Zara, Q10, like there's literally like about 50 other companies that have the same marketplace like thing too. So like I think that's quite untrue. The outcome is very, and number two, they don't have as much money as Facebook. Like that's the whole point, right? That they don't have the billions of dollars that Facebook can just randomly put in to just create another Facebook market, right? The outcome is very simple. One, it's a lot more, significantly more difficult to monopolize. Two, there's still a large amount of ability to compete because there's no one gigantic billion-dollar company facing against you. So let's agree with the premise, right? And the outcome that maybe there'll be one person filling in that vacuum. Yeah, that one person does not have the billions of dollars. So therefore, even if they do monopolize and they do capture like 50, like I don't know, like a large chunk of the market share, right? That A, are able to do it to the same degree as Facebook and Instagram. B, we think that means that all the harms of like monopolistic competition happens worse on their side. So even if it happens on our side, it's worse on their side. Cool, weighing done, right? Second thing they talk about is economies of scale, and therefore you can produce cheaper things. Economies of scale is a saturation point. The response they was given never responded to. Is that simple econs, right? That like when companies expand too big, right, they cannot keep up. So things like, for example, the middleman. Things, for example, like increasing large scale costs, right? The outcome of this is A, you have less quality of goods and services. B, you cannot call out these companies on their terrible like kinds of practices given the fact that they've become the only person. See that like it's kind of ironic that CEO comes out and says, yeah, regulations work. Next sentence, Jeff Bezos. Yeah, we haven't regulated Jeff Bezos yet. Like I'm sorry to tell you, right, but like people are still being underpaid within Amazon. So like no checks and balances have really not worked. Yeah. Even if there is an economies of scale, there's still no incentive to reduce price. Because like I think OO throws out this term without actually knowing what it means. Because EOS means reducing the cost of production. So each individual unit of good has that costs less to produce, right? If that is true, I don't have to trickle it down if there's no other market because price doesn't become something to compete against, right? Therefore, it just make monopolies richer because cost of production reduce. I can increase price when I sell to consumer because I'm the only person there. Therefore, you line the pockets of these companies more and give them more power, and that's when all of CEO's harms comes in, right? About how like big companies are absolutely terrible, right? OO also does not debate the motion because they say like, oh, marketplace. Yeah, no, Instagram and Facebook still exist on both sides and are public goods. So advertisements still exist. I don't know why no one has pointed this out yet. So OO just dies because A, if you need exposure, why do it on Facebook? I mean, like why do it on Facebook Market? Just ask Facebook to put the ads out for you, right? B, I think that like you don't have to do a Facebook Market. Like you can just have your own business and not have to engage Facebook Market to begin with, right? Then the premise was there's some real incentive to help the very small companies they're competing against, right? There isn't, given the fact they're literally competing against each other. The outcome of this is that Google and Facebook now has an incentive to push their own ads versus other people's ads, right? So Twitch is not part of Facebook. Twitch is against Facebook. Facebook has Facebook gaming that they want to promote. Facebook now has an incentive to promote Facebook gaming over Twitch. So the kinds of advertisements we're going to get are only specific to these companies, right? So all the monopolistic harms happens a lot worse, right? It's how to promote these small businesses. More than that, once this is more integration, that means smaller brands cannot like put their goods up unless they go to Facebook marketing. Facebook marketing just asks for 50% of a commission, things that will come up from member non-regulatory. For all these reasons, proud to be on closing, Gav.
Awesome, thank you. Now invite opposition Flip to close the debate. Yeah.
Okay, just to check if I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. POIs verbally, but please don't keep asking unless I still don't take you by faculty, but I probably will. So, yeah. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think this debate just has to be an opposition win when both government benches focus on monopoly, when they never really prove to us how on their side they're not going to have monopoly in the first place. Notice how this is never mutually exclusive towards their side. They say, oh, somehow Facebook will promote against Twitch and Twitch is unable to develop. But notice the counterfactual is Twitch being able to develop with the absence of Facebook game, and then Twitch being able to monopolize the market. Then boom, small companies cannot compete with Twitch because Twitch has a better consumer base. Boom, all their comps still exist on their side. They have to tell us exclusively why Facebook having another like unrelated market is exclusively harmful, instead of just telling their whole speech about monopoly and telling us why monopoly is bad, when necessarily it still happens on their side anyway. But we think that on that basis, it's still better on our side. To the moment when we have Facebook competing with Twitch, competing with Google, competing with Amazon, we think that this kind of oligopoly, which means a few large companies competing together, is necessarily a lot more, gives a lot of more competition and a lot of more choices, which is exactly what they want to achieve. We don't think that they ever prove to us why they have choice when it's monopoly by Shopee only without Facebook. This is the harm that they have to concede, and this is why government benches just cannot win within this debate. And then why do we win over OO? I think it's simple. They have the good idea, but Umar just spent too much time rebutting on monopoly that their points are severely underanalyzed. They brought to us why you have a better choice. They brought to us why small businesses will be better. But then Yushen also exclusively came in and tell you why it's better, like the principle of free market and how it works and how it benefits, and then why exclusively we have more competition on our side. And I'll further rebut all of the government's points and tell you why opposition has to win. But even if not, we think that this is just an opposition win, which is why we're very, very proud to oppose. So firstly, let's go into the few rebuttals of CG's extension, which really doesn't really make a lot of sense, where the case that makes sense actually stems from OG. They tell us that, okay, production costs will come up. We are unsure as to why production costs will come up the moment where these companies, as they characterize, has a large sum of money and a large sum of model. In simple economics, even if I don't take econs, I think it's really a common sense that the more mass production you have, the more capital you have. This means that the lesser the price. And they themselves said that if you want to capture the market, or if you want to capture the people, you have to lessen the price for you to get these people in the first place. So this just goes straight to Shenri and Uma's analysis about how this usually just benefits the consumers when you lessen the price. Then they say that, oh, you have customer service going into the back, going really, really bad. I think this was also already pointed out in OO. I don't know why they're still bringing this up. They have this attention within the market. They have a lot of they need to be good, or for example, Nokia, even if there was the monopoly, because they stopped improving, they don't have the incentive to improve. Now we have Apple, we have iPhone, a lot of newer startups that is better than Nokia who refuse to improve, and prices are still high. So we are unsure as to any of CG's points, how do they make sense in the first place. But then now comes down to monopoly, which is the thing that's directly derived from OG, so I'll rebut them all together. So they say that they will have monopoly. So, okay, firstly, let's talk about, will that really be monopoly? We don't think that there will be monopoly because there are already a lot of existing sectors, for example, Shopee. So I'm unsure as to why Facebook, with a newer Facebook shop, which is still under development, will monopolize over Shopee. So we think that on this basis, I'm unsure as to why there will be a sudden monopoly, since these companies, they themselves say, need to focus on their main sector, which is social media, and these other sectors will probably be a little bit underdeveloped or still developing, since it's a new sector within them anyway. But secondly, do they have no monopoly? No. If Facebook doesn't have Facebook games, Twitch will monopolize. If Facebook and Instagram do not have Facebook Instagram shop, then Shopee will monopolize. So I'm unsure as to why they will have no monopolization. You're very eager, so yes, whoever that is. Yeah, OG.
The idea of Shopee monopolizing is, first of all, a bad idea, considering that many people don't use Shopee. But why would an example constitute an analysis as to why other companies can monopolize when we gave you multiple layers of analysis as to why Facebook is uniquely able to monopolize through their things like algorithms, power over social media, whatever.
Okay, sure. So you brought to us that they have the choice, they have like advertisements, they have large capital. If people just focus on buying Shopee when Facebook doesn't exist, I'm unsure as to why this Shopee will not, even if they're not at the moment, why they will not like develop into this kind of like stronger companies in the first place. And if you say that Facebook is so good because they have the trust, they have the advertisement and larger capital, then that just directly stems into all our benefit about why people trust Facebook more than any other companies, which this is directly addressing the needs of the consumers, which means that with larger capital, as like OG characterized, this means that price will be significantly lower, which is better for consumers. Notice how they're contradicting themselves in both of their stands. They have to like just pick one. But then even if that even if like somehow on our side we have that kind of like monopoly, we think that is still good. Why is this? Because of the unique analysis that Yushin brought to you about how we have this free market, which means you have more competition. What does this mean? This means that Facebook is able to point out Shopee if Shopee is doing a shitty job. This means that maybe Instagram is able to call out Facebook if Facebook is doing a shitty job. This means that instead of just one sector of Shopee being in there, or like other sectors, for example, Amazon, who is not focused on unrelated sectors, is still going to be there anyway. I am unsure as to why uniquely Facebook not having unrelated sectors is like hard. But furthermore, we think that the moment when you have more choices, the more competition, this means that they have further incentive to even improve. Or if they don't, like Facebook will be outnumbered by Instagram, or like if Instagram doesn't improve, he will be outnumbered by Shopee or Amazon. So we think that with more people coming in, more of that oligopoly, not monopoly, which is happening on their side, it is so much better for development. Then they talk us about niche markets. So if their characterization is that these companies have uniquely a lot of this capital, then we think that this characterization comes in place where this Facebook is uniquely able to go into niche markets and develop those niche markets which uniquely comes from CO. What does this mean? This is a response to them when they say, when we think that, for example, why is like Facebook having Facebook shops in the first place is because they recognize that there's a vacuum within this market. They recognize that during the COVID-19 situation, the online marketing system is not good enough. They recognize that this is a unique market benefit for them to go in. We think that other startups are able to do this because they have less capital and they have less statistics to be able to go into these risky markets in the first place, which is why uniquely comes into Yusha's analysis about why they're going to be able to develop these markets, why they're able to fill in the power vacuum that's existing within like COVID-19, where like we need to have a sudden transition within like just marketing on a retail store and like being online. And furthermore, we think that we've really taken down the point about monopoly and we've addressed more of the points of wider sector compared to OO, which is why CO has to win this in this debate. Really proud to oppose.
Awesome, thank you for that, and thank you to all the speakers for a good debate. Now